Glad you made it. We're gonna make this quick today because I've got a bunch of tomatoes that are stressed out. I need to get them up potted. I also need this real estate so I can start my melons. I've got the wheelbarrow on standby. Let's gather the materials we need and get these up potted. Our base today is gonna be some recycled potting soil. I believe it was Mother Earth, but I put some rice hulls in there along with some other nutrients. I'm not too concerned about supplementing nutrients. What I am looking for is to throw some native soil in there along with some leaf mold. I overstuffed the flower beds just for this reason, so I could harvest this beautiful material. This will be a great addition to the planting mix. There's all kinds of life in here, and that's one thing that you're lacking when you're container gardening. And if you don't have this available, there's quite a few products like Mycos has Rhizae in it. You can use fungi. You can easily add beneficial microbes, but the way that I'm doing it is going to be a whole lot cheaper. We have this container about full enough. I don't want to put too much in there. I want to introduce life. I don't want to introduce rot. So we'll take our little garden claw, give it a little rough up, and just scoop that on in. By using the first little bit of this soil, we're introducing a whole nother layer and complexity of not only biological life, but we've got a whole bunch of nutrients in there. We've always dumped a ton of leaves in this particular flower bed because of the trees that are above it. I imagine this is probably the most rich soil that we have on the property. We're going to take a nice healthy serving for our mix, then repair our damage, and that's the product we got going. Well, that didn't take long. I've got the wheelbarrow here because we've got a whole bunch of tomatoes to transplant. I've got a base layer of recycled potting soil. I'm going to add the native soil. This is that native soil that I picked up in the garden, very close to where these plants will ultimately be living. We're going to follow that up with our leaf mold. We'll just kind of evenly distribute this. We're going to layer this up a little bit. Just get in there and mix it up. As you're doing this, pull out any of the big sticks and twigs. Anything that's large that needs to be crumbled up, crumble it up. Now that alone would be a little heavy on leaves, but I'm adding more to it because we've got a lot to do. This was the Mother's Earth mix that had only been planted in for 1 year. The soil should have quite a kick still, so I'm not too concerned about it. There we go. That's all the big pieces I need to pull out for the time being. When you're dealing with these small plants, you don't want to have too much biological material in there because we're still in containers. You want to introduce the microbes, but you don't want to do it in a fashion that's going to be harmful to the roots of the plant. And if you have undigested material right against the roots, it might produce some rot. A good rule of thumb when dealing with garden plants is you don't want them too dry, you don't want them too wet. If they're too dry, it could trigger a hormonal response that makes it feel like it's in a drought, possibly stunting the growth. On the flip side, you don't want it swampy because that's going to cause rot. You want somewhere in the middle, especially when you're up potting. You don't want the roots to be dry and brittle. You want them to be soft and malleable. That way they bend as opposed to break. It's going to produce a lot less shock and recovery time if we work with a damp medium. Make sure that you water anything that you're up potting, if at all possible, the night before. Well, that didn't take too long. It would have been ideal to have all this ready, but I wanted to make it here with you. My potting soil is a little bit heavy. It's a little bit oversaturated, but I'm not going to be too concerned about it. We're not trying to purposely put our plants in shock, but we do want them to start toughening up because that environment out there is nothing nice. I've got my 1 gallon containers filled about a quarter of the way, and I'm going to show you why here in just a second. First, let me know if you know what this is. This is one of the secrets to keeping your biological life healthy and fed throughout the season. We're not going to be using it today because we're not going to do any type of feeding, but let me know in the comments if you know what this is. This year I went with 4 different types of tomatoes, all with attributes that I think will do well in this environment. Just by chance, they're all heirloom varieties, most of them from the 1800s. I didn't plan on that, but that's just the way that it worked out. Great white beefsteak, the Crevasse, the Eva purple, along with the yellow tomato. That yellow one's going to be difficult in this environment, but I couldn't help it. Before we start any of the potting, I know you planted more than you needed. So let's take out some of those weaker plants before you put them in the garden. They attract pests and compromise your garden. The Crevaces look to be pretty good, but I've got 2 white beefsteak tomatoes. They're just looking a little sad. We've got bad discoloration of the leaves. They might be fine. I want nothing to do with them. We're only going to up pot the stronger specimens because we don't want to put any of those weaklings out there. It takes a very, very tough plant to survive in Arizona summer. Let's take one of each. We'll up pot them, talk about them a bit. This here's a Crevasse. I've grown these out here on the property. They do quite well in the heat. That being said, even the hardiest of tomatoes can't handle an Arizona summer. Anytime you get above 90 degrees, your fruit production shuts down and your plant goes into survival mode. Morning sun and keep them out of the heat of the day, maybe afternoon shade. That's going to be your key to success with tomatoes almost anywhere you live. Well, it's been a little bit since I saw you last. I wiped the dirt off my head, so I'm sure everybody's happy about that. Nobody told me. While you were gone, I was cooling off cameras. I upplanted about 15 plants, and now let's do it together. I've got my 1 gallon container. I've got it about a quarter of the way full. I'm gonna take my Crevasse tomato, go ahead and pull it out, take a look at the roots. The roots are fairly white. They've got a little dinginess to them. That's not too bad. We don't have a ton of spiraling. We've got good root development, but these should have been transplanted a little bit sooner, but life gets in the way. We're going to get rid of these bottom leaves because we're going to plant deep. Put our trimmers back in the alcohol solution. And now we've got this nice little root ball. We're going to massage that open a little bit. The Crevasse is a very nice tomato. It works real well in sauces. It's kind of a cluster tomato, a little bit larger cluster tomato, not quite like a cherry tomato. We're going to take the plant and we're going to gently put it down as deep as we can go. We don't want these bottom leaves to touch the soil, but that entire stem that we just cleared is going underneath the dirt. That's going to create more roots. We'll get this backfilled. We'll give it a light press down, top it off. Make sure we've got a tag. We'll get to the great white beefsteak tomato here in a second, but take a look at this one. This one's a yellow perfection tomato. You can see that the leaf structure is much different than a traditional tomato. This has more of a tobacco leaf. She doesn't do real well in hot climates, so I'm not sure how she's going to do out here on the homestead, but we're going to give it a shot. I have a place in mind with some afternoon shade that might do the trick, but we'll see how this one goes. Off to the white beefsteak tomato. This one is also a heritage tomato. It's a North American variety, which is quite unusual. We're going to take these bottom leaves off. We're going to give it a little tousle. Loosen this up a little bit. This is why we wanted the plant a little bit wet. When we open it up like this, we would be breaking these right and left. We're going to plant this very deep. I haven't grown the great white on the property yet, but I understand it's good for really hot, humid climates. I'm not sure how this dry weather is going to go, but it produces a white fruit, a nice beef, you know, a good sandwich sized tomato, which might do a little bit better in this Arizona sun. And there we go. All right, initially we're going to give them a good soaking with just water. You're going to be tempted to give them fertilizer, but resist that urge. They need regular water for this first run. My next watering, which is going to be in a few days, that's actually going to be a silica based. We haven't talked about silica. Nobody talks about silica. We're going to talk about silica. And what's in this jug? Well, you stuck around to the end. It's part of the feeding schedule. I use it a lot in teas. It's molasses. I'll let you know more about that later. As for now, I got a lot of work to do. Take care of yourself.